Hello, and welcome to the Come to Your Senses podcast. I'm your host, embodiment-based coach, Mary Lofgren. Here, we explore how to live bravely and beautifully through a lifestyle of embodiment. You'll hear gems to empower you around mindset, mindfulness, somatic psychology, and neuroscience, as well as beauty, food, style, and the art of slow living to meet your soul through the senses. I am so happy that you're here. Let's begin. Hello, beautiful friends. Welcome to Come to Your Senses. I am so grateful to have you here in the audio lounge, our auditory home. Your presence honors me. And today's episode is by special request. I recently did a poll on Instagram of what topics you might like to hear about here on the podcast. And by the way, if you have desires or ideas or aspects that you'd really love to hear about, I would love to hear from you. I so welcome your ideas. It helps me so much. You have no idea. Not just in creating content, but just in really understanding you, my beloved listener. And you can email me at hello@schoolofsensualliving.com. There's also a contact form on the website. But today's topic is a tender and beautiful one, which is how to love the unlovable within yourself. We all have parts where we feel real comfortable showing and allowing to be visible. And we all have parts that we like to hide or that we feel we need to hide because they are so unlovable to ourselves, so they certainly would not be lovable to another. And what I think is so ironic about that is when I think of my bright, shiny, radiant, beautiful parts, those parts are often the ones that seem most comfortable being seen and being outward, and yet deep down are the most afraid of being truly seen. And when I think about my dark, more hidden, also beautiful parts, those are the ones that stay most in the shadows and yet most deeply crave to be seen so that they can be loved. And that's exactly what we are going to talk about today and what I want to offer you some gems about. I am someone, if this is your first time listening, I am a certified embodiment coach. I have worked in the embodied arts for over 20 years. And I am also someone who has been practicing, studying, and mentoring addiction recovery for a long time, for almost 2 decades. I am a PTSD survivor, and I am someone who identifies as being part of the mental quote-unquote illness, aka mental wellness community. And I share all of that to say, me too. Me too. I have devoted my life, both personally and professionally, to trying to love and reveal these seemingly unlovable parts with a deep knowing that these are my most special, most precious parts, and that I am simply unskilled at seeing them for their beauty, and that I will not settle for a manufactured, forced, bypassy form of self-love that feels as much like being asleep as self-criticism does to me. And so those are all the things, all the gems that we're going to explore in today's episode. So let's dive right in. So the first thing I want to say about loving our seemingly unlovable parts is that this is where having outside help can be vital. If you have ever been to a therapist that you really love, if you have hired a coach, if you have had a mentor in your life, we are not meant to do this alone. And from a almost scientific standpoint, when we are trapped in our own minds around the parts of ourselves that we're trying to love, we cannot see the whole picture. And someone who is outside of us, who can take all factors into account and can develop a loving, intimate relationship with, such as a therapist or a coach, it gives us the opportunity. Like, one of the things I say in my coaching always is that my gift and my honor as a coach is to witness someone's potential without the limitations of their ego. And when I say ego, I simply mean the part that thinks it needs to be perfect or perform in order to be valuable, valued, and loved. And the difference between the ego and the soul, where the soul knows that it is inherently valuable and valued, and that it not only doesn't need to do anything in order to be loved, but it actually is love at its essence and its core, so it doesn't need to go looking. And that from that soul place, anything is possible, including loving the unlovable parts of yourself. And that from that place, I believe we can meet our true potential, which is different than how potential may traditionally be defined in the method of coaching that I have developed over years of practice in mindset, mindfulness, somatic psychology, and the creative arts. We define potential not as a benchmark outside of you of all the things that you can do and maxing yourself out on how high you can go and how big you can expand, which can be fun, no judgment there. But instead, we seek to embody and inhabit your presence-based potential, where you meeting your potential is you at your most relaxed and your most happy and your most creative, and you in a flow state. Like, I believe that that is the essence of human potential. And so I share all of this with you because when it comes to loving our unlovable parts, the first gem I find the most important part is that those parts feel unlovable because they've never been seen and safely held and safely loved. And sometimes we are not the ones to do that work in the beginning. Sometimes we need someone to hold our hand and to hold up a lantern as we go into the darkest corners of the caves of our subconscious and hold us in the light of love and show us that when you hold a soft golden light in that dark corner of the cave, you just might see that there are some sparkling, glittering geodes just waiting to lavish you with their beauty. One of the reasons I love this podcast and speaking to you is because it gives you a sense of me and who I am and the way that I work and the way that I hold my clients in embodying that presence-based potential. And if you feel a resonance with me, whether this is your first time listening or your, what episode are we on? 63rd time listening, I would be so deeply honored to hear more about that resonance and what it strikes in you. And you can learn more about working with me as a coach at schoolofsensualliving.com/coaching. The second gem is, what is the feeling beneath the feeling? So one of the books that really has inspired me around my own mental health and emotional wellness journey is a book called It's Not Always Depression by Hilary Jacobs Hendel. And I'll drop a link to that in the show notes. This book talks about something called the change triangle, and I won't go super in depth into this today because we could do a whole podcast episode about this, but essentially it's based on the idea that as human beings, we all have these core emotions, these core feelings: anger, sadness, fear, joy, disgust, excitement, and sexual excitement. And these are really vulnerable things to feel in their essence. When you see a child open a box with a puppy inside, that is pure joy. When you see a child whose toy has been taken away by another child, that is pure anguish, anger, and sadness. And as we grow and we learn to censor and filter these core emotions in order to survive and to socialize and belong in the world, we develop these defensive actions and emotions, as well as these inhibitory emotions. So a defensive would be anything that keeps you from feeling the discomfort of the core emotion. And once again, that core emotion might be something we name undesirable, like sadness or anger, or it might be something we label as desirable, like excitement or joy. I remember when I was in my 20s, in my early 20s, I was an esthetician, and that means a facialist, a skincare therapist. And I went to esthetician school right out of high school, and I was 19 years old working in my salon, this, salon in the middle of upstate New York. And I remember reading Allure magazine, where they would have the top facialists across the country. Like every month they would have a digest. And when I moved to New York in my early 20s, when I was 21, I was working at a salon that had a lot of PR relationships, and I was actually featured in W magazine as one of New York's top rising facialists. So this was big time. This was like name on the marquee status for little 21-year-old humble esthetician Mary. And it was like, oh my God, if I could just have that, if I could be like one of those people I see in the magazines, I would have everything. My career would be set. And I remember when I got the call about being featured, I yelped in joy and excitement, and I jumped up and down. And at the time, I was really at the height of my binge eating disorder. And I went straight to the fridge, and confusingly to myself, I went on a massive binge. And for me, binging wasn't cakes, cookies, and ice cream. It was saltines, yogurt, pickles. It didn't matter. It was like I was so uncomfortable with feeling these core emotions, even though it was something I would have named as desirable. It was like I felt so unskilled, and it brought up so much imposter syndrome, and I just was so overwhelmed that I went into a defensive action to deflect from the discomfort of the emotion. Another way that we deflect and that we inhibit these core emotions is through things like anxiety and guilt and shame. So, for example, when I'm feeling shame, like an area I hold a lot of shame is not being perfect around how my home is organized. A lot of times when I spend a full day coaching, I'll make myself lunch and leave the stuff out on the counter, and then, I put the dishes in the sink, and then by the end of the day, the kitchen's like a mess, and now I have to do the whole thing. And for a number of reasons that I won't go into here, I hold a lot of shame and a lot of perfectionism around the state of my home. And when I feel into that, so shame is this kind of queasy, warm, unpleasant feeling that creeps across my chest and my torso. And when I feel even a layer deeper than that, what I feel is the metallic quickening of fear. Fear of what this means about me, fear of what this means about my future, frustration and anger that I'm even here. What's wrong with me? Why can't I grow up and just keep a clean kitchen like I think all other people in their 40s do, which, as I have come to know about all of my friends, clients, and colleagues, that is not exactly the case. I'm not the only one. I feel sadness that I have to clean the kitchen and frustration that, this is a pattern that I really am challenged to break and find myself in often at the end of the day. And what's important to know is that in the change triangle, so when we are able to safely and skillfully feel these core emotions, and what I mean by safely and skillfully is, we could do a whole podcast episode about that too. In fact, it might be nice to make a note about a future episode on those two things, but I'll just summarize by saying that safely means we're not going to go too far outside our window of tolerance for those strong feelings and strong sensations. And so having body awareness, support around that, etc., etc. And skillfully, I guess the essence of what I'll say about that is an ability to feel these strong emotions and separate sensation from story. Not totally, not sterilizing the emotion and removing the vulnerability of it, but being able to create just a tiny amount of sacred separation where we can feel, oh, this is a strong feeling. It's a strong emotion. Emotions just simply being thought that get attached to sensation. And it's also not the whole story. So I can feel these strong sensations and allow them to pass through, knowing that all sensation moves in a wave. No sensation and no feeling is permanent. And when we safely and skillfully allow ourselves to feel these core emotions, it leads to an open-hearted state, feeling calm, curious, connected, compassionate, clear, confident. And this is what we mean when I talked about going into the dark corners and the caves of your subconscious is, I'm sure you've had an experience of turning towards some of these parts of self. And when looking through the lens of curiosity and compassion and understanding through your own eyes or through the eyes of a therapist or a coach or a friend or a mentor, all of a sudden, you see that these are the dearest, sweetest, often most brilliant parts of you. So, going back to the original gem, what is the feeling beneath the feeling? Because when it comes to anxiety and shame and guilt and these distraction emotions and distraction actions, that to me is the equivalent of chasing my tail. I really can't win when it comes to those things because what those things tell me is I need to be more perfect and then I won't feel this way anymore. Whereas these deeper core feelings and core emotions, when I can gently and curiously hold space for them, I intercept the tail chase with the reality, which is that the things that produce anxiety, shame, triggers, things like that are never going to go away in my human experience. But what I can shift and what I can change is my ability to be more adaptable by feeling and holding space for and moving through and getting support with my core feelings. To me, that's what it means to love the parts that feel unlovable. The next gem is to ask yourself, what kind of clench am I experiencing? So recently I was talking with a client and she was talking about this aspect of her life that brings her a lot of frustration. And I encouraged her as she moved through her week when we were wrapping up to open to the clench. Like when she feels these things of frustration and anger and annoyance, like feel that. Let yourself feel that. That is information. That's not you being lazy or unmotivated. That's really information that this might not be working for you. And she also shared a piece about the clench. And I know she's a loyal and devoted podcast listener. So if you're listening, dear beloved client, hello. She also shared about this clench that speaks in a much different tone. So if the first clench makes the sound of like, ugh, I don't want to do this. This is annoying me. Like that's useful information. That's honest. And then there's another kind of clench that says, you idiot, what's wrong with you? That you can't do these things. That more inner critic, inner demented stage mom kind of voice. And that is a clench that I set boundaries with. So the clench of frustration, the clench of this is hard, that is, once again, useful information that I think needs to be included in my feelings of core emotion, like that healthy aggression, healthy anger, healthy grief. Those are really important things to listen to. When it crosses over is when it turns into that guilt and shame and self-abuse, internalized abuser, inner critic. And that's when I like to say, not today, Satan. No, thank you. Those voices inside are not my own. Those are the voices that I have been conditioned to believe about myself in order to stay small, so that I can stay in an experience of, I'm like being careful here not to say safe, because the truth is being inside a comfort zone that feels like a baby calf being groomed for veal in a cage that's too small isn't what I would call safety. I would say it is limiting risk to try to avoid pain. But that can lead to a diminished ability to feel the full spectrum of who you are. That actually numbs our core emotions and our adaptability at the end of the day. And so I set boundaries with those parts of myself and with those thoughts. And one of the ways I do that is by saying, cancel, cancel. When I have a negative, self-defeating, internalized abuser thought, oh, cancel, cancel. That's not me. No, thank you. No. Sacred no to that thought. Sheila Kelly, who is the founder of S Factor, pole dance and erotic movement, is a real fierce student and teacher of feminine and masculine energies. And she talks about snapping those thoughts, like you're snapping a mosquito. It's just like these buzzing thoughts that aren't who you are. They're just limiting thoughts to keep your raw, unleashed power in a can. And so by snapping them, it's like you're taking a somatic, body-based action to say no and set a sacred boundary from within. And the final gem that I want to share with you is, sometimes I think about writing an article on Medium or something called, "Can I just hate myself in peace, please?" Sometimes I think the pressure to love ourselves can be so self-defeating, because the truth is, being in relationship to ourselves is much more like being in a marriage than it is being in a new relationship. Cupid, bloomy, rosy, lovey-dovey times are lovely and should be frequent. You deserve that. We all deserve that. But sometimes you just need a break from that person. Having been in several long-term relationships, it's like there are times where you just need space, and it's healthy. But how do you take space from yourself? You can't break up with yourself. And so in those moments, like I had an experience like that today where I just noticed, like I was looking in the mirror and I was working out and I was having some thoughts, and it was just like, yeah, okay, why don't we go into our respective rooms? And I just take the pressure off of myself. Like, I kind of need a break from you, but I can't get a break from you because I am you. And so I'm just not going to take these thoughts and voices very seriously, and I'm going to go real gentle here. And a way I wrote this in my notes is, hating yourself is not a reason to hate yourself. Sometimes I think, and hate is a strong word, and I think, and I hope that you know what I'm talking about, is that I don't think any of us are either free from or meant to be free from our voices of self-criticism. These are just a natural aspect of being human. And so when those unlovable parts and those unlovable thoughts come up, yes, honey, this is what it's like to be on a 9-hour road trip. I may not like you very much right now, but I love you. I'm going to stay in here. I'm going to try to be as kind to you as possible, but you're just really getting on my nerves right now, is also a gem to try out in your own life experience. So, my loves, thank you so much for listening. That brings today's episode to a close. Once again, if illuminating your mind, elevating your body, attuning your emotions, and expressing through your creativity is something that rings your inner bell, I would love to talk to you about potentially becoming a coaching client. Embodied Intelligence is opening for new clients in mid-June of this year. And so head to schoolofsensualliving.com/coaching, where you will find a opportunity to sign up for the waitlist and receive a waitlist subscriber only savings when we open the program in just a few weeks. Thank you so much for listening. It is such an honor to share this time with you each week. And I will see you in the next episode. For coaching, classes, and community in creating a lifestyle of embodiment, head to schoolofsensualliving.com. There you'll find a free video series on how to reduce anxiety and intercept the stress response through powerful, confident body language. Head to schoolofsensualliving.com/confidence to watch your first video